July 1992, London. In a building in the business centre of the West District, well-trained white-collar workers are constantly busy, with discussions and keyboard crackling noises. And in a small temporary meeting room, a serious conversation is taking place. Felix, are you really determined? Although you have been in the company for less than a year, I swear that your talents have been recognized by everyone in the company. If you stay here, trust me, you will a great accomplishment. A typical middle-aged British man started. He was wearing an exquisite business suit and his slightly curly hair was neatly arranged. Sitting across from him was a young man about 20 years old, handsome, with light blue eyes especially impressive. At this moment, Felix smiled, "Boss, I have made up my mind." The middle-aged man stared at Felix for a long time, seeing that he had no thought of wavering, and sighed helplessly, "Well, you won." Felix smiled gently, stood up, picked up his suit from the chair, and shook hands with the middle-aged man who also stood up. The middle-aged man leaned forward, opened his arms and hugged him tightly, muttering in a low voice, "Everyone has aspirations, right? I think we have lost a potential newcomer." Felix blinked his light blue eyes, "We will always meet better people." After half an hour, Felix packed his things and walked out of the building. As he approached going out, he watched the flow of people on the street with anticipation in his heart. Felix carried a small box and walked on the street, stopping from time to time to avoid passing cars, and he also looked at the make and style of the car with great interest. Antique car. His footsteps are brisk, and it seems that the long journey didn't make him tired, but he was full of interest. After walking for nearly an hour, he finally returned to his temporary residence, or home, in this city. The street scene became more and more familiar. Felix saw more than one acquaintance. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Murphy." "Good afternoon, Mr. Haipu." After dealing with some familiar faces, Felix finally stood in front of his home. Took out the key and opened the door. Stepped in and closed the door. "Woohoo!" Felix screamed cheerfully, closed his eyes, spread his arms, and at this moment, the ordinary house seemed to come alive all of a sudden. The suitcase was taken out of the palm of the hand, and floated to the front of the cabinet. The door of the cabinet opened automatically. A dozen pieces of clothes hanging on the upper floor lifted their hem slightly so that the box could lie comfortably. Felix's suit and white shirt were automatically taken off, and the tie jumped out of his neck with twists and turns, hung on the bar of the closet, and 3 other delicate ties of different colors were placed together. The belt around his waist was automatically loosened, and as he stepped forward, his trousers separated smoothly. Felix moved his hand and a blue silk pajamas flew out quickly and slipped on him. Still intimately hit live button. Felix snapped his fingers softly, and soft music played. He still closed his eyes slightly, but waved his hands like a conductor. There was a clinking noise in the kitchen. After a long while, a cup of fragrant and steaming coffee floated in front of him. He twisted the cup, took a sip with the music, and smiled with satisfaction. Felix Haipu is not only a free man who has just resigned, but also an adult wizard. He graduated from Hogwarts, the best and only magic school in England. 10 years have passed since Felix received the notification letter with the gorgeous coat of arms from the orphanage. The past 10 years have not only allowed him to graduate from Hogwarts smoothly, but also transformed him from a boy into a boy. 21-year-old mature man. Time flies. I have graduated for 3 years. Felix sat on the sofa, feeling a little. Then mumbled slightly, "It's been 21 years since I crossed." Yes, in addition to a free man in the workplace and a hidden wizard, Felix also has the deepest secret, that is, he is a traverser. God knows that he originally planned his life trajectory. How surprised and excited he was when he received the invitation letter from the Wizarding World. Harry Potter's world. The magical adventure of the 3 little ones. But unfortunately, they are not people of the same generation at all. When he entered Hogwarts and asked for Harry Potter information stupidly, he realized that he was 9 years older than him. In other words, from the time he enrolled to graduate, he couldn't even see him in person. I have to admit that Felix is not a Ha fan, and he only has a little knowledge of the plot. One knows, half solution. After all, he can't predict the future, he won't know that he will travel to the real magical world. If he can know in advance, he must memorize every word. What really made him understand the plot was the rise of short videos afterwards, such as a certain Sheikh Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com. It is also by virtue of this that he can faintly draw a plot line. But want to remember the details? That is pure delusion. Fortunately, what he is really interested in is magical magic, a magical world that is alive and can be touched. And he got it all. Evening. Felix sat at the desk, quietly flipping through a magic book, the clock ticking, making his heart a little irritable, and he lost his peace of mind. He is waiting for a letter. A vital letter. Time flowed a little bit, and finally a click sound came from outside the window, and an owl stood silently outside the window, tapping the window lightly. It's finally here. Felix's heart beat violently, a magic wand slid out, gently waved, the window opened automatically, letting the owl fly in. The owl hovered twice above its head, dropped an envelope, and landed on the desk on its own, pecking its feathers lightly. Felix quickly picked up the envelope. On the back of the envelope, there was a wax seal, a shield coat of arms, and the larger H letter was surrounded by an eagle, a lion, a badger, and a snake. He opened the envelope and pulled out the letter, which read, "Dear Mr. Felix Haipu, we are happy to inform you that your application for employment has been accepted. The interview will be held at 10 a.m. on July 21st. Please be prepared in advance. Also, please enter the school through Flow Fans. If you use other methods, please inform in advance." Vice Principal Minerva McGonagall. Felix couldn't help but shook his fist and drank the hot tea on the table. He has been waiting for this day for 3 years. 3 years, really a long time. Felix leaned back in his chair, his mind leisurely, accompanied by the fragrance of tea. It seemed that his memory went back 10 years ago. At that time, he was an 11-year-old ignorant boy with dreams and longings in mind, like a worker who just entered the city to work hard. Felix admits that he is very ambitious. Anyone who is mature and knows part of the plot in advance has no shortage of ideas for a career. So naturally, he was assigned to Slytherin College. But this academy, whose keywords are ambition, blood, and glory, is not friendly to him. At that time, the mysterious man fell less than a year, and his remaining pure-blood concept still occupied the market, and Slytherin, as the base camp of the pure-blood family, its internal turmoil was even more volatile. At exactly this time, a student from a Muggle orphanage was assigned to Slytherin. The impact on them can be imagined. Fact above, examples like Felix are not without, but quite rare. If Felix is just an ordinary person, or even an ordinary traverser, then his 7-year school career is likely to be accompanied by words such as school violence, bullying, and indifference, and these things are likely to affect his whole life. But it's a pity that Felix is not an ordinary person, but a man with gold fingers. He can force some of his practical magic spells to advance beyond his current level of magic theory through repeated practice. Of course, not unlimited promotion. For example, if his magic theory level is level 1, then he can make a specific magic spell reach level 2 or even level 3 through repeated, large, and super large practice. The higher the level, the more difficult it will be. Although the golden finger is not strong, it also helped him through the initial embarrassing period. Looking back at his school career in the previous 3 years, it can be regarded as a masterpiece in the face of the world. Before entering school, because of his curiosity about magic and the delusional psychology of persecution belonging to adults, he spent most of his time on the 2 spells he mastered, except for trying some simple spells, and the 2 spells were different. It is all petrochemical and armor body protection. 1 offense and 1 defense are in line with his golden mean when playing games in his previous life. Relatively speaking, it is simpler to use petrification. After thousands of boring casting exercises, Felix forced it to level 2 while the armor protection was barely cast at level 1. It is a miracle for him who has a theoretical level of almost 0. The magic world should have awarded him a Merlin badge. With level 2 Tong Tong Petrochemical, in the first week of enrollment, Felix overturned the entire Slytherin first-year freshman, and knocked down a second-year boy who had cast a curse on him, and hung it in the bathroom to blow. It was cold all night. This move had a huge impact, at least it caused Snape, who had just become the youngest dean of Slytherin College ever to have a headache. Snape had to deal with the extremely complicated internal conflicts in the academy while facing external pressure from the parents of other Snake academies. To be fair, this extremely test is the management ability of the newcomer Professor Snape. And what caused Snape's headache was still to come. Felix overturned the entire second-year wizard at the end of the first-year semester, making the Academy Cup party seats empty. It is natural that Felix stayed in school for forced labor during the entire vacation period, and this was exactly what he wanted. Otherwise, he suspects that some parents will come and put a curse on him. In the circumstances at the time, this was not a delusion. By the second grade, Felix converged a lot under Snape's pressure. Instead of sending Slytherin students into the infirmary on a large scale, they sent them one by one. At the end of the third grade, Felix became Slytherin's actual strongest student, the uncrowned king. The effect of this is remarkable, and no one in the entire college dared to be disrespectful to him. Of course, some people outside the school still speak out, threatening to make him look good when he is hiding in the school. Yes, Felix stayed at school for 3 full years. At most, he went to Diagon Alley to buy teaching materials. No one had ever been to other places. Sad school life. Of course, there are reversals in any story, and the reversals belonging to Felix are in the 4th grade. During the 4th grade vacation, Felix finally walked out of school, and during a vacation he knocked down 7 adult wizards who tried to attack him and sent them to Azkaban. This was a big news at the time, but the bigger news came later. At Felix's 5th grade entrance dinner, Shafik, one of the 28 holy pureblood families, proposed a pureblood duel. Felix can still recall the always calm Professor Snape's open mouth and Dumbledore's staring eyes. It's funny. Felix, who fell into the memory, gave a boyish smile. The so-called pureblood family duel is a very old way of duel, that is, a duel is launched from the standpoint of family members until one party is completely down or dead. Even in the most chaotic and disorderly era, this kind of duel is extremely rare. But I have to admit that this type of duel exists and has not been abolished. When Felix stood in front of the only Shafik in the snake yard and humiliated the Shafik family slowly in front of everyone using the ancient dueling etiquette, the 6th grade Shafik Fig collapsed directly on the ground, his body swaying. Even if Principal Dumbledore persuaded him after the party, he did not withdraw the idea of a duel. He still remembered what he said to Dumbledore at the time: "Principal, Shafik attacked me twice during the summer vacation. 4 people in total. 1 person the first time, 3 people the second time. Do you know what spell they used?" Dumbledore has grey hair, his eyes are deep and full of wisdom, but he did not speak. And Felix calmly said, "It's the unforgivable curse. Except for the imperious curse, the other 2 are used." Of course, they didn't succeed. I can hardly imagine that 4 years after the fall of the mysterious man, someone else will do it. Something like this. Dumbledore said in a weary way, "The Shafik family are not Death Eaters, at least not all, they are just a pure-blood concept, a very stubborn family. You reading www.yuyuganshu.com, but it doesn't make much difference to me, right? They sent 4 people during the holiday. As far as I know, the Shafik family is not thriving. 4 people, their family counts as old, underage, and 10. 1. The Shafik family couldn't fight at all. Felix's combat effectiveness was recognized during the summer vacation, and after the Shafik family 4 were sent to Azkaban, the remaining combat power was less than 4. They can only use their influence to take extravagant moves, but the effect is very small, because in front of the pure-blood family, family glory is the most important. This unfinished duel caused an uproar in the entire British magical world. After a small half-year of various twists and turns, the Shafik family permanently withdrew from the British magical world, and the pure-blood family duel, which lasted for nearly 1,000 years, also ended. Under the influence of some people, it was officially abolished by law. This event is called the August 7th duel event, and its impact is far-reaching. For some die-hard families, it is no less than Voldemort's downfall. During the 5th grade vacation, Felix visited some pure-blood families. In summary, he completed friendly meetings and reached a friendly consensus on certain issues. Felix is very pleased. The pure-blood family is also reasonable. In the last 2 years of Hogwarts, Felix was harmless to humans and animals, exploring the mysteries of magic. Until graduation, he made a request to stay on to teach at school, but was rejected by Dumbledore on the grounds that he was too young. At other times, he had a very comfortable life, and the little snakes were very good-hearted. Summarizing the 7 years of school life, he had a pretty good time. Of course, Professor Snape doesn't necessarily think so. According to the latest Hogwarts gossip, the bad personality of a certain professor is related to a bad student he taught in his early years. July 21st at 10 o'clock in the morning. Felix was dressed very formally. He stood in the fireplace, sprinkled a handful of fluo powder, and shouted "Vice President Hogwarts office." After a green flame passed, his figure disappeared. Hogwarts Vice President's office. Professor McGonagall is sorting out school documents with a serious face. The professor of transformation class, who is known for being severe, is always expressionless, but she is still in a good mood at the moment. Gryffindor College won the long-lost College Cup last school year, which keeps the Dean of Gryffindor College's happy mood to the present. Pang! A faint green fire flashed in the fireplace, and a young, well-mannered man stepped out. Felix looked at the surrounding environment. Nothing changed at all. It's been a long time. He smiled gently at McGonagall. "Professor McGonagall, hello, long time no see." Professor McGonagall pursed her mouth, which means that her mood is getting bad rapidly, or she has switched to work mode. "Long time no see, Felix." Professor McGonagall also taught him and is one of his professors. For this famous student, her mood is very complicated. Of course it is not as complicated as Professor Snape. Before the long-lost Academy Cup, Gryffindor had a tragic 7-game losing streak, and this experience has a lot to do with Felix. Except for the previous 3 years, Felix's learning environment was too bad, which made him have to fight back, so he deducted a lot of points. In the following years, after forcibly mingling with the snakes, he seemed to finally realize that he was one a Slytherin student should fight for the honor of the college. And the next few years can be described in one sentence: glory to Slytherin. Felix stepped forward, looked at his pocket watch. "I hope I didn't miss the interview." Professor McGonagall was interrupted to remember, stood up and led him to the principal's office. "Chocolate Frog." She read the password and sent Felix in. Before leaving, she said, "Your book is very good. It seems that you have had a very fulfilling life in the past 3 years." "Thank you, Professor McGonagall." He was taken aback for a moment, smiled, and then stepped up the stairs. After 3 years of graduation, he is not for nothing. Especially when he failed to apply for a job for the first time, he repeatedly thought and suspected that his student career was too vigorous, so he followed the advice of Principal Dumbledore: walk more and see more. He spent a year wandering the wizarding world, and spent the remaining 2 years working in the Muggle world, studying Muggles. The results are remarkable: 3 books in 3 years, 2 Muggle studies, and 1 ancient magic text. Also accumulated a fortune. Walking through the long steps, Felix entered the principal's office. which was filled with various books and alchemy products. The wall was painted with portraits of the principals of Hogwarts. On the side of the principal's desk, a phoenix closed its eyes and took a nap. Dumbledore was studying something at his desk. The whole office was very quiet. "Principal Dumbledore, good morning." Felix said hello. As he spoke, the room suddenly came alive. The portraits of the principal opened their eyes one after another, looking at Felix, pointing and whispering. "One of the portraits is extremely exaggerated, ha! The best Slytherin is here." The man in the portrait wears a goatee, slender eyebrows, and a Slytherin robe. He is Phineas Black, who was voted the least popular Hogwarts principal by students, and is also from Slytherin. Felix gave a graceful salute. At this time, Principal Dumbledore finally raised his head. He had a very different appearance, a silver-white beard, dragged long to his chest, his robe was not neatly dressed, and he wore a pair of half-moon eyes. But these are not as good as his eyes. His eyes are very bright, and his blue pupils seem to be gleaming. Felix was a little dazed. Time did not leave too many traces on the principal, and it seemed to have left too many traces. "Ah, ah! It's Felix." Dumbledore stood up and strode forward, his actions very vigorous. "I've been waiting for you to come." Felix shook hands with the principal cautiously. After all, he came to apply for a job and was rejected 3 times. The two sat on the chairs. Dumbledore looked at him through the thin lenses and waved his wand. "What would you like to drink? Pumpkin juice? Tea?" He blinked. "I still have fresh butter here." "Beer?" "A cup of tea, thank you." Dumbledore flicked his wand, a cup of steaming tea floated in front of him, and Felix took a light sip. A bitter taste poured into the nose. It was Chen tea. "It seems that the principal doesn't drink much tea at ordinary times. The tea that Sybil gave me, although I can't taste good or bad personally, but according to her, it comes from the Far East." "Con man! Felix defamation, at least one of you two is a liar." After drinking tea, the conversation started to get to the point. "Felix, you have done a great job in recent years. I have been reading your books. I have to say that you are very novel and very in-depth in Muggle research, gave me a lot of ideas for this old man." Felix smiled. "Thanks to your advice, the world of Muggles is very wonderful, especially in recent decades, they have developed very fast. As for the writing, maybe because I am also a Muggle, I am more of a Muggle." "I understand." Dumbledore shook his head. "Born does not erase your efforts. Many people in the wizarding world are of Muggle origin, but they are not good at Muggle research, at most they have a better understanding of some common sense. But this is far from understanding. Of course, because I was a pure Muggle in my previous life." Dumbledore brandished his magic wand and flew out a book from the desk. The title is Muggle Struggle, from Million Years Ago, which is one of Felix's works. He was a little surprised, because Dumbledore had been reading his book just now. "This book is very inspiring to me. I have read it more than once, especially when you look at the history of science and technology. Is this the word? From the perspective of the history of science and technology, you read www.yunsha.com to explain how Muggles follow step by step. Shaped like a beast, it has grown to the present level after millions of years. I have to say that this is a miracle. You also pointed out that the Muggles' technological level will leap rapidly every once in a while, the time interval is getting shorter and shorter, and even the prediction of the next leap is not far away. Very enlightening." Dumbledore to him the book is full of praise. Felix humbly said, "I did not create this kind of thinking. In fact, many sociologists in the Muggle world, Muggle scholars who study Muggles, their writings have given me a lot of help." Dumbledore said calmly, "Many Muggles are equally wise, but few in the magical world admit this." "I agree with you, Professor Dumbledore." Dumbledore blinked immediately, seeming to skip the topic, and said wittily, "So, you should have read a lot of Muggle books?" "Frankly speaking, many of my Christmas gifts are books. They seem to think that I prefer books. But in fact, I have read most of them. Compared with that, I prefer a pair of woolen socks. Of course, if it is a book from the Muggle world, I don't think I will refuse it. A bright hint. At least he knows what to give for Christmas. Yes, although they don't have magic, some of them are willing to spend more than 10 years to complete a book dedicated to explaining a problem or a theory. Felix said softly, "It's difficult. And because of this, very precious." Dumbledore was a little relieved. "It seems that you have really gained a lot in the past few years." Then he suddenly asked a question, "Then why are you so obsessed with teaching at Hogwarts?" Felix seemed a little puzzled, and asked, "I don't understand, Principal." Dumbledore put his hands in front of him, showing his scrutiny gaze. "I mean, you have a great future, but you have been obsessed with returning to Hogwarts. I want to know why." The principal's meaning is very obvious. You have lost your reputation. After 3 years of graduation, you have written 3 books, each of which is quite exciting. Especially Muggle Studies. These 2 books, although they are not selling well, at least compared with the other professor he interviewed that is also a writer, but the sales of the 2 works are very different. However, it is undeniable that the influence of these 2 books is extremely wide. One, Muggle Struggle History, speaking from million years ago, and the other, How Muggles Think, have become the world's largest books. Part of the Ministry of Magic's guidance books for departments dealing with Muggle issues. At least Dumbledore has discussed some of the contents of the book with his friends, including the director of the Department of Prohibition of Muggle Abuse, and the members of Wizengamot. They also praised the 2 books. Felix thought for a while and said, "President Dumbledore, I have a lot of affection for Hogwarts. It is my home. It makes me feel kind. Moreover, I am also willing to teach students. Something very fulfilling." Dumbledore interrupted him. His azure blue eyes were full of sharpness, and he could not tell that they were the gaze of a centenarian. "We all know that this is not true. I want to know what you really think. This is very important, and it is related to whether you will get a teaching position." Felix is a little sweaty. He subconsciously operated the occlumency, and then stopped. This is not a wise decision. Occlumency is not a panacea, especially when your level is relatively low, let alone facing the greatest wizard of this century. Fortunately, he had a plan before he came, so he made some small preparations, for example, a few drops of blessing agent. After just 2 seconds of thinking, he decided to follow his instinct and tell the truth. Felix finally spoke. He said sincerely, "In order to study the mystery of magic more deeply." Dumbledore nodded, making a respectful look. "Principal, you have always been my principal from enrollment to graduation, so you should have a certain understanding of my experience. Before the 5th grade, in order to deal with some troubles, I spent a lot of time in magic practice and ignored some theoretical subjects. This is the truth. In order not to be beaten and sap, he has always been very urgent. At that time I was pursuing power and the power of a single spell, but I was wrong. It was not until the last 2 years of school, when I finally had free time to appreciate the mysteries of magic, that I realized what I had missed. It is also true that while his golden fingers helped him become stronger quickly, it also led him in the wrong direction, one-sided pursuit of the power of magic while ignoring the importance of theory." Dumbledore nodded slightly, his tone became gentle again, and at the same time a little curious. "So, your research direction is ancient magic text. This is not hard to guess. After all, Felix's 3 books, in addition to Muggle Studies, there is another one called Exploration of Ancient Magic Texts. And Muggle research can't be called the research of magic. Yes. The more you study magic, the more you can't do without ancient magic texts, especially when you need to trace the roots and study ancient magic, you can't do without it. I was in the 6th or 7th grade, and found out this, but unfortunately, in my OWL's exam, the ancient magic text is only A, and I cannot continue to study, so I can only choose to learn by myself. This is even more true, and it is a mistake made by Felix's youth and ignorance. Felix continued, under the influence of the elixir, his intuition was very keen, and his sentence became smoother and smoother, I do have selfish intentions. Hogwarts has the largest library in the world, and there are a lot of information about ancient demons. Textbooks. But on the market I have read all the books on the market. Unfortunately, there are many theories and too little practice. They seem to use the ancient magic text as a language, only to translate the manuscripts of the predecessors. And they are studying the process of Muggle. I unexpectedly got a new inspiration, I tried to combine the two. You know, ancient magic texts are also indispensable knowledge of alchemy. Dumbledore was very interested. You mean, if I heard correctly, you want to combine alchemy with Muggle items? Felix seemed a little excited, he talked eloquently, yes, but this is only the initial stage, that is, transforming Muggle objects and turning them into magical products. For example, air conditioners are a kind of cooling equipment that can keep indoors. The temperature is constant in a comfortable range. Muggles need to be driven by electricity, that is, an energy source, and it is easier to convert them into magic products. The core is a freezing spell, plus a detection spell. Of course, stability needs to be considered, and this requires the use of ancient magic texts. And what I am doing now is to combine the wisdom of Muggles with the magic of wizards. You know, Muggles always have a lot of novel ideas. Some of their ideas are difficult to turn into reality. But if magic joins in, it will be very simple. Dumbledore nodded, and Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com commented, the first step is transformation, and the second step is creation, brilliant ideas. The two discussed this issue for a long time, and it took 3 full hours before Dumbledore suddenly woke up. He was indeed immersed in the discussion with Felix just now. It can be said that Felix is one of the most outstanding students he has come into contact with in recent decades. Especially under his own suggestion, after 3 years of precipitation, this student burst out with bright sparks. Even though he is a Slytherin. It's a pity that he is a Slytherin. Dumbledore was silent, he was hesitating, time seemed to go back 50 years. Is so alike, so alike. The same Muggle orphanage, the same Slytherin, the same excellent and polite, and the same obsession with power, how should he choose? Time has proved that his choice decades ago may be wrong. If he didn't use magic flames to force the teenager to admit his mistakes, if he cared a little more, and even if he could discover his wolf ambition earlier, maybe there would not be one. The terrifying Dark Lord. What about now? Seems to be the same choice before him again, how should he decide? The old man looked in a daze. He looked at the young, handsome, and outstanding student opposite, and seemed to see the shadow of another person. Voldemort. Felix, who was on the opposite side, seemed a little puzzled. I was telling the truth even though I had chosen to tell the truth. We had a good conversation just now, why is Dumbledore's face complicated and painful now? What did he say wrong? Hurt him? What is going on? Felix has a headache. In the principal's office, the silence was restored again. After a long time, Dumbledore seemed to come back to his senses, he had already made a decision. Dumbledore considered his words, I'm sorry, Felix, Professor Bubbage has no idea about retirement. Felix showed a disappointed expression. But, Dumbledore said quickly, you can see that you are very good at ancient magic texts. Yes, Principal. Felix thought of something, suppressing a glimmer of hope in his heart, and staring at Dumbledore. The old man on the opposite side did not deliberately sell the gate, and straightforwardly expressed his thoughts, I hope you will teach ancient magic texts. I wonder if you want to. Of course I do. Felix blurted out, and then slowed down, yes, I do. But Professor Babbling. Ah, Bathsida, Dumbledore seemed to mutter in exclamation, and then explained, She has served Hogwarts for more than 50 years, and in recent years she has been hoping to take some time off. Look at the changes in the world. A period of vacation? You mean to let me temporarily replace the ancient magic text? Is it a school year? Or a semester? Felix frowned slightly, which was not what he wanted. Hogwarts' collection of books is too rich, and becoming a school professor will have a lot of convenience. What he wants is not a year and a half, at least 5 years and 10 years, right? Dumbledore was amused, his silver hair trembling. He pointed out solemnly, Felix, Professor Babbling is not a pure wizard, she has a magical bloodline, which makes she looks at us. The way of time is different. Other blood? Felix recalled the appearance of Professor Babbling. It seemed that from enrollment to graduation, he has not changed. Is she a mixed race? Mixed with other human races? This is possible. There is no shortage of such existence in the magical world. The most common heterogeneous hybrids are the hybrids of humans and giants, Vales, dwarves, and fairies. As far as he knows, there is more than one in the school. Before he could think of a result, he heard Dumbledore continue, in the eyes of Professor Babbling, taking a vacation for 10 or 20 years is normal. In fact, she complained to me that there was no vacation. At the time, I had recommended several names to replace her, and among them was you, Felix. Felix suddenly had a good relationship with this professor. Although he could not choose ancient magic texts in the 6th and 7th grades, he had always consulted her for advice even after graduation, and he never broke the letter. It can be said that the professors who have kept in touch with him after graduation, except for Dumbledore, are Professor Babbling. Professor Dumbledore said, "Your arrival will make Professor Babbling very happy. She has accumulated a lot of wishes over the years to complete, and it is almost full of parchment." Felix nodded and agreed when he saw such a good thing. Walking out of the principal's room, Felix let out a long sigh of relief. Although the interview process had some twists and turns, finally, the result was good. I finally returned to this place. Hogwarts, the center of the British magical world. This time, as a professor. Calmed down, he returned to Professor McGonagall's office and happened to see a scene where the figure of a Phoenix patron saint dissipated, and he was shocked. It seemed that Dumbledore had already informed Professor McGonagall through the patron saint of the result. Sure enough, Professor McGonagall lifted his glasses. "I have received a message from Dumbledore, Felix." "No, I should call you Professor Hypo now." "You can still call me Felix, I will always be your student." Professor McGonagall snorted slightly. "Professor Snape may not be happy." Felix scratched his head. He was very angry at Snape back then. But McGonagall quickly skipped the topic. She waved her magic wand and flew out a dozen parchment papers from the large cabinet in the office. These parchment papers were smashed into a neat stack, showing that the owner was serious and serious. Character. These are your class schedule, student list, obligations and powers, purchased items, and what I personally think you need to use. Of course, the most urgent question is whether your textbooks need to be changed. Textbook. Felix was a little puzzled. Yes, textbooks. McGonagall repeated. Many professors have their own teaching philosophy. In principle, Hogwarts encourages this, so they can decide on their own way of class, the ratio of theory and practice. Of course it also includes the selection of teaching materials. McGonagall glanced at him. "I know you also wrote an ancient magic textbook." Felix knew it, and after considering it for a moment, he decided not to change. Professor Babbling's textbooks are very good. I benefited a lot when I was in school. Okay. Professor McGonagall seemed to be noncommittal about his move, but Felix heard her murmur again. The voice was too small for him to hear clearly, but it seemed that another professor was involved. It would be great if the professor did the same. Felix is not easy to ask. As Professor Mensin, he doesn't want to have more troubles before he officially enters the post. As a Slytherin, he does things with a strong purpose. After a while, Professor McGonagall raised his head, looked at Felix who was motionless, and said, "Professor Hypoo, you can go. We will mail you the official letter of appointment and entry time, and if you have additional information, we will also follow along. Included." Felix smiled, "Professor McGonagall, I want to make more preparations. You know, although I have made some achievements in the field of magic, I am still very young after all, and I have no relevant teaching experience here. On one point, you are experienced and I really need your guidance. I don't know if it's an illusion." Felix noticed that Professor McGonagall seemed to smile. Of course, the corners of his mouth might also twitch. "I heard that people with a straight face are prone to facial paralysis." Felix's thoughts were not tuned. "Felix, you are always so polite." McGonagall seemed to sigh with emotion, but stopped the work at hand with a sense of face. "What do you want to know?" "I want to look at student information first, such as academic performance, the number of students in different grades in each college, and some outstanding or well-known little wizards. It would be better if there were everyone's evaluation." Professor McGonagall glanced at him and waved his magic wand silently. The door of the large cabinet crackled open, and from inside flew out a sky full of parchment scrolls. Felix quickly took out his wand and waved it lightly. A quill on the table turned into a long table. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Professor McGonagall knows, stacking the sheepskin rolls on the long table, "Great Transfiguration. Inseparable from your teaching." Felix said modestly. "I remember your first 3 grades, your evaluation of polymorphism is not high." Felix was a little confused. At that time, he was busy fighting the 7th grade snakes. He didn't have enough time to practice spells every day. There was no time for transfiguration. It was almost enough. It was also later that he picked up transfiguration. Professor McGonagall didn't dwell on his grades because she knew very well Felix's situation at the time. To be honest, she had always criticized using the sorting hat for sorting. For a long time, she believed that Felix should be treated. Assigned to Gryffindor. Just at that reckless, brave energy, who believes it is not Gryffindor. Even among the little lions, he is the most reckless one. These are the information you want, but there are no comments. Regarding some outstanding little wizards, I can only stand on my side and say some Gryffindor Academy names. That's also useful. Felix didn't pick it. Oliver Wood and Percy Weasley in the 6th grade, Alia Spinnet and Angelina Johnson in the 4th grade, Hermione Granger in the 2nd grade. McGonagall squeezed lips. Of course there are the Weasley twins, Fred and George. My God, if they put half of their energy for pranks on their studies. Is there only these? I remember that the famous Harry Potter is also in school, isn't he not in Gryffindor? Felix was a little curious. His past and present, the name is like thunder. Harry. It was obvious that the name made her even more entangled. What kind of person is Harry Potter? Professor McGonagall is definitely one of the most qualified to answer this question. To be fair, except for an anonymous potions professor, the other faculty members have a good view of Harry. Is sincere, polite, and has a sense of justice, but on the other hand, he is also slightly impulsive and reckless. This is not entirely a bad thing, at least it fits the position of the little lion. But the above are all character evaluations, if you study it. Can only say, not in detail. In detail, it has great potential. Is exactly the same as the routines of some teachers in the parent conference in the previous life. Finally, Professor McGonagall introduced Harry like this: Harry is a very friendly little wizard, and Quidditch plays very well. Made Felix scratch his head a little. I was asking him what he was good at. You told me he was very friendly? Is there nothing else to boast about except this? But I'm good at Quidditch. Looks very athletic. Frankly speaking, Felix was a little envious. It's not envious of being popular on the Quidditch pitch, but in his opinion, people with good athleticism are at least half a dual shooter. What is the dual? The power of the spell, casting skills, mentality, experience, and reaction ability. It can be said that he fully possesses the first 4 traits, but the final reaction ability can only be said to be average, barely holding back. But don't think Felix is weak. With his golden fingers, the power of his spell is far beyond what he should have. As early as the end of the 4th grade, he could stand up to the end with 3 adult wizards and forcefully break through each other's defenses. Not to mention him now. Take a certain potion professor who did not want to be named as an example. In contrast, Felix's magic theory may be limited to a little younger, but the power of the spell is definitely more than that of the opponent. And this, he came out day and night. One main attack spell is practiced tens of thousands of times, do you dare to believe it? Take one of his strongest attack spells, Tong Tong Shiwa as an example. This spell was the first magic he encountered. He is now rated as the top level 6 and has been unable to break through level 7 for a long time. Without him, the magic background can't hold him to move forward. But what does the level 6 magic mean? Just 2 years ago, with 2 6-level spells and a little bit of skill, he knocked down 7 aurors in the American magical world in an instant. Unparalleled speed, and the power of the curse to destroy the dead, is Felix's evaluation of himself. It was precisely because Felix had forcibly overstepped 2 levels and mastered 2 level 6 spells at the end of the 4th grade, that he had enough confidence to face the outside world. Felix was a little bit emotional. If he also has excellent reaction ability, maybe he doesn't need to use drugs to use the big move. But fortunately, he has not been for nothing in the past 3 years after graduation. A new magic has already taken shape. Here, Felix strongly thanks those dark wizards who have made indelible contributions to his magic career. Thank you for trying the law. Felix sat on the other side, flipping through the information provided by Professor McGonagall, transcribing some information from time to time, and recording some statistics. This is also his masterpiece of mixing in the Muggle world for 2 years. It is said that he has worked for 3 companies in the past 2 years, and every time he leaves, the company is reluctant to leave. This is not because he has imposed a confusing spell. In the afternoon, Felix had afternoon tea with Professor McGonagall, during which Felix asked a question. Assistant. McGonagall was a little puzzled. It is an assistant, which can be understood as a person who assists the professor in handling some chores, such as sorting out research materials, correcting papers, supervising examinations, and listening to courses. Felix corrected. Of course, there are some small benefits. Professor McGonagall understood something. She rolled her eyes slightly. What assistant? I think you just want to be lazy. Sure enough, as Professor Snape said, that fellow Felix is a standard Slytherin. When he got the teaching position, he began to change his way to escape his job. I don't think it is the right thing for a professor to throw his job to the students. Professor McGonagall said sternly, pursing his lips. Professor McGonagall, you have misunderstood me. I actually want to cultivate excellent students. Professor McGonagall has a look on your face that you don't look at me. It is true. According to my assumption, in the first year, I am not going to set up my own professors' club. After all, I need time to get familiar with the teaching and the environment. The so-called professor club is that certain professors will invite students from various colleges who have performed well enough in their courses to take time to gather together to study magic. Is commonly known as Kai Xiao Zhao. For example, Professor McGonagall's Transformation Club will hold events from time to time to teach some magic and skills that will not be involved in classes and exams. Professor McGonagall nodded, precisely because Felix was a newcomer. She didn't mention it to him at all. Do you mean to discover talents in advance? To prepare for the club next year? McGonagall asked. That's right. Professor McGonagall lowered his head and thought about it. He felt that this could be done and it would have many benefits for the students. Just a few extra pointers would be enough for schoolmasters to flock to them as the only outstanding graduate with a dominant level in recent decades. Felix is completely qualified. As for learning scum? Who cares what the scumbag thinks? This has nothing to do with the scumbag. There is no scumbag in the professors' club. Then what is your standard? Professor McGonagall asked. This kind of opportunity is not common. She is prepared to use power for personal gain. No, she does not avoid relatives, and prefers to recommend talents from her college. Felix thought for a while, and probably made a few items. Well, the first is the active learner, the person who is willing to learn actively and is very eager for knowledge, and secondly, the memory is better. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Third grade. Don't be too high, after all, I'm the first assistant, I still want to spend some time training. By the way, the grades of the ancient magic texts are not important, I have special teaching skills. He added. Felix thought about it again, and felt that these requirements were almost the same. In fact, he just wanted to find a tool man to help him with all kinds of chores. But tool people also have ranks. The low-level learning tool type tool people are not as powerful as his magic. The master learning tool is different. Not only is it comfortable to use, but with a little training, you can develop into teaching assistants, magic research assistants, and even partners. It can be said to be very profitable. Professor McGonagall didn't eat any snacks, and quickly went through the list of the little wizards of the Lion House. Wood can't do it, conflicting with Quidditch. Percy is good, but he is in the 5th grade, and he will prepare for the Owls exam this school year. Weasley twins? She was afraid that she would be returned within 2 days. But these two people do have great potential. Then, a name jumped into my mind. You mean Hermione Granger? Felix was a little surprised. This name seems to be one of the adventure trio, right? In the same class as Harry Potter, that's the 2nd grade this year? Yes, she almost perfectly meets your requirements: slow of knowledge, excellent memory, and not a big grade. Professor McGonagall said kindly. She had a good impression of Miss Granger, because there is a gossip that Granger's nickname is Wheat Grid. Seeing Felix hesitated, Professor McGonagall recommended the Weasley twins again, but told him in advance of their terrible mischievous feelings. I'll have a chat with them when school starts. Felix didn't make up his mind in the end. After reading the information, Felix said goodbye. On the way back, he stopped by Digiao Alley and purchased 2 sets of ancient magic texts from grade 3 to grade 7 from Lihen bookstore. One is brand new, and the other is the baby he spends a lot of time carefully selecting from the pile of old books. The old book version of the textbook comes from 4 academic masters. Although the handwriting is different, the notes are consistent and detailed. He feels that he can refer to it and have the right to research. The next day, he started the intense and exciting lesson preparation, and first looked through the textbooks. It was surprisingly simple. Professor Babbling is worthy of being an expert on ancient magic texts, and the selected textbooks are very distinctive, mainly based on the current mainstream views, but also interspersed with a certain proportion of practical magic texts. The current mainstream view is, ancient magic text is an ancient text, used by ancient wizards to record magic, and modern researchers are responsible for translating those leftover magic manuscripts. This is only part of the truth. In fact, although they are all named ancient magic texts, their history is quite long. In remote ages, it was a mysterious pattern used to carry the magic power of wizards and was widely used in ancient times. Magic and ancient alchemical creations. And these magical ancient magic texts are the power that Felix pursues, and it is also his research category. Then he flipped through the notes of several school tyrants. Among them, the important and difficult points, understanding of ideas and solutions were very enlightening to him. These could help him understand how the little wizard views this course. That's why he likes to learn tyrants. After all, things gather together. With the notes of the tyrant, coupled with the syllabus he obtained from Professor McGonagall, he is already very clear about the teaching content he wants to complete. Next, is the consideration of the teaching style. Although he has already got the faculty position he wanted, the Hogwarts 1000-year-old book collection once again opened the door to him, but at any rate he is also a legendary graduate, returning to his alma mater, can't let people complain about his poor teaching. He can't afford to lose this person. What comes out of the snake yard is good. What should I do to be attractive enough? Felix thought over and over. The first thought that came to his mind was the sea tactics. At this moment, he is not fighting alone. In his past and present lives, the lingering psychological shadows of many candidates are attached to him. There was a strange laughter of Gigi in the hut. Closer to home, Felix took out a piece of parchment and wrote the word sea tactics on it, and immediately led to two branches. One is the merits, and on it is written quickly consolidate the knowledge learned. The other branch represents disadvantages, it says easy to trigger resistance. Felix, of course, has to make achievements, but he also knows what the level of that little wizard who can't help is if he doesn't want to overpower Professor Binns to become the most unpopular professor, he has to take his time. The key is to be interesting and predictable, but fun is the opposite strategy of the sea tactics. Felix murmured, perhaps you can start with writing diaries and small essays in ancient magic texts. Time is passing fast in thinking. The final assessment is also very important, you can consider adding a practical part. The ancient magic text is boring, but in fact it is essential knowledge for in-depth study of magical mysteries. One end is connected to ancient magic and the other is connected to ancient alchemy. The former represents a powerful force, and the latter represents the once glorious magical creation. Ancient magic is undesirable, and I can't figure it out now. But it is a feasible idea to complete or at least repair an alchemy product with what you have learned. Felix entered a certain kind of brainstorm, all kinds of thoughts splashing with inspiration. The quill on the table danced quickly, bringing out after images. Until the evening, Felix completed the preliminary design of the course. It's me. He looked at his results with satisfaction. It was 3 densely packed parchments filled with text and flowcharts. The remaining question is what kind of alchemy products are used as the teaching vehicle. This is not an easy task, because Felix didn't plan to prepare 5 alchemy products according to the 3rd to 7th grade. Too much trouble, taking up his study time. He is going to choose an appropriate alchemy item and divide it into different difficulty gradients. For example, a third-year freshman only needs to complete some, etc., analogous to the tasks of connecting wires and pushing and pulling switches in physics experiments. As for the 7th grade, I don't want you to build a rocket, but to build a load-bearing car. What should be the carrier? First of all, it can't be too simple. Simple can't distinguish the difficulty, but it can't be too complicated, otherwise I will be tired. The little wizards of Hogwarts, there are no 1,000 but 800, even if only Onet Herd choose the ancient magic text, it is an unbearable workload for him who wants to engage in teaching innovation. Felix has a headache. He wants to strike a balance between efficiency and quality. After 3 days in a row, Felix rummaged through his collection, but could not find a suitable entry point. There are too few ancient magic textbooks on the market, and the practical ones are even rarer. Felix wailed in his heart, which made him even more eager for the Hogwarts collection. That is his one piece. Felix heard all kinds of strange legends when he was in school. For example, the 4 founders of Hogwarts each left a mysterious treasure, but in his opinion, if he can master all the magic knowledge in the library, this person the achievement will not be lower than any one of the big 4. The biggest treasure house is right in front of them, but most people turn a blind eye. Didn't he just miss it before he repented, or else he had been planning to return to Hogwarts for several years? Isn't it the white moonlight in my mind? After finding nothing, Felix walked out of his cabin, ready to go out and relax. Mr. Haipu, I haven't seen you these days. An elegant lady ran into him. Linda, I'm busy preparing for a new job recently. Did you find a job? After a brief conversation, the lady left slightly reluctantly. I have to mention that Felix's gentle character and handsome appearance have made him always welcome in the neighborhood. Streets of the West End of London. Felix wandered aimlessly. Compared to the hurried pedestrians on the road, he looked extra leisurely, like a person from two worlds. It's not wrong to say that. Halfway through, Felix passed by a dentist's office, looked at the clean and tidy storefront, his eyes paused, and a thought that had dazzled his mind for a long time appeared again. No hurry, come back in a few days. He continued to walk, and finally stopped in a juvenile activity room. Hearing the familiar Yo Fakinda and dog sign, Felix walked in a ghostly manner. The light inside was slightly dim, and the young teenagers were frantically tapping the buttons, shaking the joystick tirelessly, and uttering the weird words of hoo ha ha in their mouths. Fighting game. Felix really feels back to his childhood. Of course it is not the childhood in this life, but the previous life. Familiar characters on the screen made him feel cordial, especially the thinly dressed young ladies. Fireman's skills are so cool. Ice Girl's big trick is full screen. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com, what do you know? Felix laughed blankly. Sure enough, game fans all over the world got similar names, styles, and genders. Was about to turn around and leave, suddenly a flash of light flashed. Wait, what was I thinking just now? Fighting? Figure? Yes, figure. Felix's eyes lit up, and he finally found an alchemy product suitable for the 5th grade, which was complex enough and not difficult. Isn't this just a figure? No, isn't this a magic puppet? His day and night thinking these days has finally come to an end. Take the characters in the fighting game as a template, and use the ancient magic circuit as a means to reproduce some of the characters in the game. This kind of magic puppet is acceptable to children in the wizarding world, and the Muggle wizard has no psychological barriers. As for the difficulty, it is also easy to adjust. For the 3rd and 4th grade students, he can complete the engraving of the magic puppet main body, leaving some nodes and branch structures for them to complete. Senior students need to do it by themselves and complete at least one functional module. Felix gets more excited as he thinks about it. He can even engage in a doll fighting contest. After all, children in the wizarding world are too bitter, and the entertainment method is really single. What is good about Quidditch? He doesn't like Quidditch. It's definitely not because he failed his first-year flight class. A picture emerged in Felix's mind. The two students met, each holding a slap-sized magic puppet in his hand, posing in a classic duel posture. Come to an exciting magic showdown. Felix fell into some kind of delusion, and the corners of his mouth could not help being raised. What does it take to make a real magic puppet? We must first understand, what is a magic puppet? Simply put, it's the stuff of nursing homes. As far as Felix knows, there are a group of stone puppets in Hogwarts school. The craftsmanship is extremely complicated. They have been immortal for thousands of years, and they have always protected the safety of Hogwarts. But for teaching, there is no need to be so strict. Find some good clay, mix with the right amount of dragon dung, and mix with some magical animal blood. Of course, dragon blood is the best, but teaching aids are naturally cheap. But he can make some advanced battle puppets for his personal collection. Felix quickly sent an application report to Professor McGonagall. After some complicated communication, Professor McGonagall finally agreed to his idea and asked him to give it a try. Also sent with the letter was the official letter of appointment and a small bag of jinjialong. Felix quickly completed the materials for the student version of the magic puppet. The clay was dug by himself, and the dragon dung and magic animal blood were purchased from the black market. After that, he spent another 3 days wandering in Diagon Alley and Knockdown Alley, as well as some magic black markets in various countries, and finally collected the advanced materials for his hardcover magic puppet. Then, Felix wrote to his dear old Slytherin classmate, borrowing the house elves from their house temporarily, and preparing to build a magical version of the assembly line. Felix emptied his home, and at the same time cast a traceless stretching curse, transforming the room into a square the size of a square. In front of him is a row of house elves. "Everyone, I'll take care of you next." After Felix demonstrated how to make a puppet model, he retreated to the second line and delegated the task. As for him, he is also very busy, okay. In addition to redesigning their own hardcover combat puppets, adding various restricted level powerful magic circuits for them, but also taking into account the food problem of house elves, so that they can devote themselves to work. Felix is not silly, as evidenced by the testimony of a house elf. "Mr. Hypo is really great." XN time slipped away day by day, and in a blink of an eye, half a month passed quietly. Felix looked at hundreds of models of magic puppets, and was very satisfied. Even though these models did not have any magic circuit, they could barely be regarded as a rough piece. But this is enough. On the occasion of parting, Felix prepared a sumptuous farewell dinner for the house elves. "You are so generous." XN harvesting a wave of thanks again, Felix sent away these volunteer workers. In the following week, Felix began to carve ancient magic texts of varying difficulty according to the number of people in each grade, and at the same time used reinforcement spells to prevent damage. After all, these are all money. Felix had tired himself half to death before he was completely settled. "I don't say anything like that next time. I'm so tired." Felix felt that he was squeezed dry and his face was pale, but his understanding of ancient magic texts took another big step. Pick up a semi-finished magic puppet at will. This is a humanoid figure with a palm. It looks like a young man who is scaled down. He wears an Eastern-style student uniform and wears a pair of fingerless black gloves. There are golden sun badges embedded behind the gloves and jacket. It took a few minutes to complete the ancient magic text circuit. He waved his magic wand and the magic puppet immediately moved. First, tentatively move his hands and feet, kick and punch, and then raise the index finger to pose a classic shape. After a few seconds of stagnation, he violently waved his arm. A ball of football-sized flame followed the predetermined ancient magic circuit from the finger. Excited, fly half a meter far away. He 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 he. Felix's magic puppet, although inspired by a fighting game, he did not copy it completely, and made some magical changes in appearance and moves. Magic puppets are divided into 12 different shapes, including handsome men and beautiful women, old people and children, enough for students to choose the type they like. And each puppet, in addition to the basic character fighting moves, also has the design of external release skills. But considering the actual situation, Felix didn't make it too complicated, but roughly divided into 4 categories: flame, ice, lightning, and cutting. Take flames as an example. Considering safety issues, the external release skills released by the student version of magic puppets are the most common flames, and at best they are more cool in appearance. At this point, he is very knowledgeable. He even changed the skill of a character. The big move is to transform into a flame bird. Yes, it is a phoenix. Felix is very satisfied. Maybe he can bring a new trend to Hogwarts. After finishing the teaching equipment, Felix focused on his hardcover battle puppet. There are 6 in total. If you have to post a label to satisfy your imagination, you can summarize it into the following keywords: Flame Master Pretty Young Lady, Master Hanbing's Beautiful Young Lady, the beautiful little sister of Master Thunder, the Cutting Master is Pretty Young Lady, Speed Master Pretty Young Lady, the beautiful young lady of the Transformation Master. Haha, the features are surprisingly consistent. Generally speaking, 2 new types of Speed Assassin and Deformation Interference type have been added to the collection version of the figure. These 6 figures are not parallel imports, but he spent a lot of high-level materials, burned complicated ancient magic texts and protective magic to complete the alchemy products. Take the Flame Master as an example. She burned a powerful magic flame with extremely high temperature. At the same time, it can shoot at a distance of 20 meters. The power can blast half a wall and maintain this fighting intensity for 10 minutes. According to his estimation, these 6 magic puppets, Yu reading www.yuyugonshu. If Com picks one at random, you can easily slap a 7th grade graduate. And the 6 hands are in one, with long attack, close combat, speed, charge, strong attack, and interference. It can fight alone, or in 2 or 2 groups, or 3 or 4 people, up to 6 people, and its power also increases exponentially. Well, Felix felt maliciously that these 6 puppets held an anonymous potion professor for 10 minutes, and there was no big problem. The only flaw is that it requires wizard control. But the point is that Felix himself is much stronger than the magic puppet. Chicken ribs, Felix shook his head, there seems to be a lot of room for improvement. At least give them a certain fighting wisdom. Looked at the remaining materials, he thought for a while, decided to mix some inferior materials, and make 5 more puppets, which is stronger than the student version and weaker than the collector's version. As a prize for the opening of the class, 1 for the 5th grade, 1 for the 1st level. Perfect. Felix took out the small box and put the teaching aids in the box. Needless to say, this box also had a NONMR King stretch curse. Felix didn't think much about his 6 hands. He waved his wand to make them float and fly to an emerald green ring on his left index finger. This object, which looks like a storage ring, is essentially an alchemy product that strengthens the NONMR King stretch curse, and the stable magic text is also engraved with a concealed magic text circuit, which minimizes the magic fluctuations. From the outside, it looks like a decorative gem ring. But this ring stored 1/3 of his net worth while traveling north and south. But the 3 caves of the Cunning Rabbit, Felix already had 2 caves, and he was still the last cave. And this 3rd cave, he had already had eyebrows a few days ago. Felix gently rubbed the inside of his wrist. There was a flesh-colored pattern the size of a fingernail. If you didn't zoom in and check it carefully, few people would notice this pattern. This pattern is actually an ancient magic text loop, with a small space hidden inside. In the space, is a spare magic wand. After all, the pattern is too small, there are not many things that can be hidden. Moreover, this ancient magic text circuit has been in a closed state, and it can only be opened if the conditions are met. The condition for opening is to smear a layer of own blood. This is currently his most secretive, and also the most imperceptible backhand when one day he is in a disadvantaged position, or is disarmed, lost his wand, or even the ring is robbed. This magic circuit will help him come back. As long as he is not killed on the spot, he has a chance to turn defeat into victory. The ring on the left hand is bright, and the magic circuit on the inside of the right wrist is dark, 1 bright and 1 dark, almost perfect. And now, Felix is still preparing to complete the construction of the 3rd cave. The reason for being so cautious is not because Hogwarts is a dragon's lair, hidden dangers, or what he intends to do, but he knows that when he became Hogwarts' ancient magic text professor, he was even it is officially involved in the plot. With his superficial understanding of the plot, it is difficult for him to be foresight, so he had to take precautions early. He does not believe in the so-called fairy tale, only believes in his own power. But no matter how he doesn't understand the plot, he still knows some of the most basic things. For example, the adventures of Harry Potter in the previous life have made 8 movies, 1 for 1 academic year, which is 8 years in the wizarding world. This is in line with Felix's imagination, 7 years of adventure in the school, plus 1 year after graduation to completely defeat the mysterious person, no problem. Very rigorous reasoning. 1 school year has passed, and if nothing happens, Voldemort will be completely dead in 7 years. Thinking of this, Felix felt relieved. Of course he is not Voldemort's opponent now, but the future is hard to say. Felix is planning his future strategy, while going out and walking down the streets of London. Half an hour later, he was standing at the door of a dentist's office. It happened to be the one he found a month ago. Felix pushed the door in, and the bell at the door made a crisp sound. A middle-aged man in a white lab coat poked his head and walked out of the back room. He glanced at Felix and asked, "Are you here to see the teeth?" Felix replied briefly, "I want to fill my teeth." The dentist nodded and led him to a chair. "Please sit down. My name is Will Granger. You can call me Dr. Granger. This is Felix Hypu." Dr. Granger asked him to lie down on a chair and looked at Felix's mouth with something similar to a searchlight. His face was a little confused. "Mr. Hypu, your teeth are in good condition. They are clean and tidy. Very well proportioned." Felix pointed to the upper left side of his cheek. "I want to fill a wisdom tooth." Dr. Granger was shocked. This is really a strange request. Wisdom teeth are not very useful. He said sincerely, "Mr. Hypu, I don't recommend you to fill a wisdom tooth because..." Next, Dr. Granger showed his professionalism and taught him a full 20 minutes of dental knowledge. During the period, a little girl with fluffy hair came in. She was about 12 or 13 years old. She glanced at the two of them, especially when she saw Dr. Granger's eloquent performance, revealing a come-again life. Kin love-like expressions. Finally, Felix had to interrupt him. "Dr. Granger, let's do this. You can help me make the teeth first. After I have tried it, I will decide whether or not to fill the teeth." Dr. Granger thought for a while and thought it made sense. He took out a pen and paper to record the size of Felix's mouth. After making gestures on the paper, he quickly confirmed the size and shape of the wisdom tooth. Then he walked to the back room and started to work. Felix looked at the furnishings of this clinic with interest, especially the small cabinets hung on one of the walls, and the magnified tooth model can be clearly seen through the glass. Just when he looked attentively, a confident voice appeared on his left. "Tooth filling is not the best choice, especially a dispensable wisdom tooth." Felix turned his head, looked at the little girl, and immediately heard her add, "It will hurt." "It hurts? How painful!" "You need to drill a hole in your gums with a small drill bit, then drill the same hole in your artificial wisdom teeth, connect them with screws, and then fix and adjust the position again." Felix has a toothache suddenly. The little girl's science continues. "Even if the teeth are filled, it's not going to be done once and for all. On the contrary, if the gums are damaged, they will be more susceptible to injury. Spots, which cause the original teeth to loosen and fall out, must be repaired." "Stop talking. He already has a picture." Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Although he can use magic to repair and relieve pain, his soul is now traumatized. Looking at Felix's uncomfortable expression, the little girl shook her long fluffy hair and ran to the corner to read. It was obvious that she seemed to be in a very happy mood. After nearly 20 minutes, Dr. Granger walked out again. He is dragging a silver white tray on the palm of his hand, on which is an artificial tooth that has been polished and modified. "It looks great, doesn't it?" Dr. Granger praised his craft. But Felix simply nodded. He was startled by what the little girl said just now. Following Dr. Granger's instructions, he tried this artificial wisdom tooth. Of course, there was no drill hole or wire wound, just a test of comfort. "Very good," Felix praised. "But I decided not to fill my teeth anymore." "Really? It looks like you have made a correct decision." Dr. Granger was not angry about missing a deal, but was happy for him instead. But this guest made a new request. "I want to buy this tooth as a souvenir. Remembrance." It was another strange request, Dr. Granger thought to himself. Even the little girl who was reading quietly looked up at him. "Yes, memorial." "Okay." In the end, Dr. Granger only charged for the materials. As Felix walked out of the clinic, Dr. Granger still felt something strange in his heart. He complained to his daughter, "A very strange guest, don't you think, Hermione? Hermione Granger raised her head, looked at Felix's disappearing figure on the corner, shook her head, and lowered her head to read the book again. After returning home, Felix came to the workbench and began to transform the tooth. First, drill a hole at the bottom of the tooth and make a small hole. Secondly, smooth the small hole. Once again, place it under the microscope, and use the carving knife purchased from the micro-engraving merchant to carve the regular ancient magic inscriptions, nesting each other to form a loop. This is a delicate task, constructing the magic circuit in the extremely tiny space. It can be said that the entire magical world can do very little. And Felix reduced the difficulty of the entire magic process by 2/3 by relying on professional carving tools and the latest generation of microscopes purchased at a high price. This is one of the results of his theory, the combination of Muggle wisdom and magic. The so-called Muggle wisdom does not only refer to some of their whimsical ideas, their tools for studying the world and transforming the world are also very fascinating. In the wizarding world, few people can do this. Pure-blooded wizards don't say, some of them hate Muggles, and some don't reject them at best, and mixed blood, or some wizards from Muggle families, they may be more familiar with the Muggle world, but at the critical time of 11 to 18 years old, their energy is mainly in magic. After adulthood, the mode of thinking has long been fixed, and it is no longer possible to combine the advantages of the two deeply. Until the afternoon of the next day, Felix completed the construction of 12 groups of magic text circuits, each of which was as short as 3 or 5 ancient magic texts, and as long as more than 10. With the completion of the construction of the last ancient magic text, he carefully connected these 12 groups of circuits to form a whole. The magic circuit is lit up one by one, and the brilliance of magic blooms in the narrow space. As the last circuit lights up, the entire 12 groups of circuits are finally completely closed, forming an endless whole, turning into a bright and unified mysterious pattern. The small holes in the teeth began to expand without a trace, and soon became the size of a suitcase. This expansion did not end. Felix waited quietly, recalling the results of the day and night, with satisfaction at the corners of his mouth. Finally, the internal space of the tooth expands into a small half-room size. Then, the hidden circuit begins to take effect, and the surging magical power fluctuations are quickly reduced until it becomes insignificant. The stable circuit begins to stabilize the entire magical structure, and the solid circuit makes the tooth, the carrying object, change its very strong and hard to wear. The most important thing is to start the loop, which will only be opened according to the conditions set by him. Felix smiled with satisfaction, and the third cave is done. He took out the suitcase and transferred the things he had prepared long ago to the tooth cavity. Felix positioned it as a spare material storage room to carry with him, and there were not only 7 or 8 magic wands. There are various magic potions, flying brooms, tents, and other items. After finishing all this, Felix stuffed his teeth into his mouth and fixed it with magic. He smacked his mouth, nothing unusual, and licked the wisdom tooth deep in his mouth with his tongue. Well, it was not much different from a real tooth. Dr. Granger's skills were really good. Felix sat quietly at the desk, his eyes calm and long. All his belongings, most of the commonly used and unimportant ones, are in his suitcase. The important items, as his backhand materials, are divided into 3 parts, which are the 3 caves of the cunning rabbit. The first cave, the left-hand jewel ring, which stores part of his precious materials, medicines, books, and some research results, engraved with hidden magic texts. The advantage of is that it can be carried around and is convenient for daily application, but the disadvantage is that it is used too many times, it is unavoidable to be noticed, and it is difficult to escape the sight of advanced wizards. Felix's positioning is daily necessities and things that are placed on the bright side to attract firepower. The second cave, the magic circuit on the right wrist, only stores a spare wand. The biggest advantage of is that it is extremely hidden, almost impossible to detect by conventional means. Felix's positioning of it is a weapon for desperate counterattack. The third cave, Felix's wisdom teeth, stores a large amount of conventional and strategic materials. the advantage is also extremely hidden. Felix's positioning for him is, when he encounters a major crisis and has to hide and flee, he can provide him with sufficient supplies. This is almost safe. Felix believes that a crisis-conscious person like him is absolutely rare in the wizarding world. Perhaps some experienced aurors have this mindset, but their methods are definitely inferior to their own. Especially because he is proficient in occlumency, the conventional torture can't make him confide the secret at all. Of course, this is the worst scenario. Felix doesn't think he will fall into this situation. But the world is unpredictable, so you have to be more prepared. In the next few years, there will be a shadow called Voldemort over the British magical world. Felix never dared to underestimate him. Perhaps the second-generation Dark Lord has IQ problems, but he is definitely a magic genius, and he spends far more time studying magic than himself, not to mention that his research topics are pseudobicide and evil. Killing and death. The next week is less than a week from the start of school. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com. Felix is ready to relax, he is really tired this time. Watching movies, listening to concerts, and enjoying food, after all, he still has £100,000 in his account. Most of the time in the future, he will move to the magic world, and all the money can't be exchanged for Garen. It is a waste to keep it. Felix spent a lot of pounds to buy a series of Muggle supplies as a recreational thing besides teaching. Especially, he spent £8,000 to buy a small projection equipment, the kind used in cinemas, with copies of classic movies on the market. As for Hogwarts can't use Muggle items? Is this a problem for him? Similarly, music is also essential. Felix considers himself a standard Slytherin, so he can enjoy it as much as he can. Approaching the beginning of school, Felix organized his room and put some magic items into his suitcase. If a thief came to the door and took away 1 or 2 magic items, it would be no big trouble. What else needs to be prepared? Felix thought for a long time, then suddenly took a picture of his wise little head. By the way, books. He remembered the hint from the principal during the interview. First, he bought a few pairs of woolen socks in different colors, and then he began to scan the goods in major bookstores. There are not only what he saw, but also Christmas gifts selected for the professors. Whether it is useful or not, prepare it first. Felix is going to give his former dean a guide to common experiments for middle school students, the kind with many illustrations. Hope he will like it. I believe he will like it, after all, I am his best student. Felix is looking forward to his entry more and more.